A product or a process ultimately approaches the level of taste of the auteur. And so if the person who's calling the shots loves to think creatively, loves to optimize things, then everything that they touch is going to approach that same level.
The Digital Banking Podcast is powered by Typhon.
Thank you so much for listening to and watching the Digital Banking Podcast. If you enjoy our episodes, please follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. And if you're willing, we would love if you'd take a minute to write us a review. Thank you so much for being a part of the journey that is the Digital Banking Podcast. One thing you'll never hear on this podcast, sales pitches. Except this one. Java for Kids coffee. Every bag purchased sends $5 to the Children's Miracle Network hospitals. So now your morning or afternoon cup can make a real difference. Check out javaforkids.org for more. Welcome to another episode of the Digital Banking Podcast. My guest today is Tommy Cotter, the Director of Data Products at Benzinga. You know what's funny about seeing somebody on a Zoom call? You can't really tell how tall they are. And Tommy really isn't that tall. He's only about 6'8", which is obviously a little shy of 6'9". Okay, all jokes aside, you can safely assume, rightfully so, that meant Tommy played basketball in high school and college. Now, this is an important element to the story here, though. You see, when Tommy was planning for college, his primary goal was not to go to college and get a specific degree. It was to play basketball. But he did have to pick some sort of major, and he had an aunt in robotics who said, you should look into engineering. So he did. And when he got out of school, like any good engineering graduate from Detroit, he walked down the street to get a job at one of the big three auto manufacturers. And he happened to land at Fiat Chrysler. And his role was focused on the optimization of the assembly line. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how does this translate to community financial services? I'm glad you asked. You see, when an assembly line is down for even a second, or isn't optimized and produces one less truck a day than it should, it's not a good day. Perfection is measured in micro elements. Now, this really invigorated the drive for perfection within Tommy. After talking to a friend at a barbecue during the pandemic, Tommy decided to switch industries altogether to financial services tech. Why? One of the things core to what Tommy cares about is helping people and helping them succeed. And financial services has a really unique opportunity to do just that. And his background in making every second of the process count, it's vital to financial services. 1 second of downtime for a payments network, that's a big deal. 1 second of downtime for digital services, that's a big deal. So I'm excited to talk to a fellow car nerd today about translating engineering precision and ruthless operational excellence into financial services. So Tommy, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Josh. And great intro. Really appreciate that.
Well, when you give me good content to work with like that, I mean, come on.
I do what I can.
It's always cool to see. I think one of the things that I really loved about getting to meet different people through the podcast is it's really cool to see people that have made those big industry changes, because there's a lot of value in staying in one industry your entire lifetime, right? Like you build an insane wealth of knowledge and domain expertise in the one thing. And so many times it means you become the subject matter expert that just no one will ever touch just because you've seen everything. But there's also a really big value in coming in with a totally fresh set of eyes and being able to look at stuff and go, well, why are we doing it that way? Well, it's because we've always done it. And having that fresh set of eyes can really, shine a light on different things. So I'm excited to kind of get your perspective on somebody who, made a huge shift from building Ram 1500s to financial services.
Yeah, I mean, first things first, when you're young and you don't have a ton to lose, I think that's the perfect chance to make a switch into something that might be better for you in the future. And so that's exactly what I did. I looked around and I saw a bunch of my coworkers just being stressed and they were always working. And so I'm like, hey, I don't want that to be me in 30 years. I want to have a fruitful life and enjoy myself and make an impact. And so that's ultimately what led me to switch. And yeah, once I did, like you said, I had all of this perspective that somebody who may have just started out as an intern in the same role might not have had. And so I was glad to kind of come in and have a sense of urgency and pull different levers, see what they do. And so I really enjoyed it.
So I want to start by talking me through what your experience was looking at the assembly line for the Ram 1500, right? You were saying that it was incredibly data driven. So you were looking at all these different metrics across what was happening on the assembly line from start to finish, and then looking for bottlenecks, trying to optimize, but also like you would physically go and be on the assembly line and would even just watch and look around and see what was happening and observe. So talk me through what that experience was like.
Yeah, I mean, so for people who aren't familiar with auto, and I know this isn't an auto podcast, but the message translates. It's very fascinating the way that these assembly lines work. And I was in the body shop making the actual body of the truck. And so it's about a mile long in the entire body shop. It snakes its way through and then it goes and gets painted. And the way it works is there's all of the metal sits on a bed, and that bed kind of rolls across the line from one station to the next. And in every station, a robot goes and makes these spot welds. And so we would measure the throughput of each station. And we could say, hey, this station is only sending through it, it takes a minute to do its full cycle or something like that. And while this station takes 30 seconds. And so obviously the one that takes a minute, that's the bottleneck. And so we would try and focus on, well, why is it taking a minute? Does the robot path need to be changed? Does the equipment need to be changed out? How can we optimize it? And so it took a lot of problem solving. And that was probably the biggest thing I learned is, okay, I can reach in my toolbox, pull out any of these tools and apply it to solve a problem.
Huh. Did you name the robots?
There were 900 robots. I couldn't possibly name any of them.
He's like the one that takes the minute, or you're like, come on, Stan. Work faster, Stan. Let's go. Come on, dude. Yeah. You got to weld faster, bro.
I know.
No, but you're right. I mean, I can see how there's in everything that we do in life, right? There's an opportunity to have an optimized path. And it's funny, we've even talked about this concept on the podcast before. And it's little things that sometimes we do in our daily lives that you don't even realize, right? And I love the example that everybody knows, right? Of like Steve Jobs' whole, like wear the same thing every single day. It was just optimized for, it was one less thing to pay attention to. And, it's funny. Somebody used an example with me recently, and I think it was on the podcast, where they were saying, they were like, yeah, for example, a huge waste of your time in life is matching socks from the laundry. So I buy 100 pairs of the exact same pairs of socks, and then I just dump them into a bin. I never take the time to match them up. And then I just reach in and grab 2 pairs of socks. Why do I need to match 2 pairs of socks just to unmatch them again to put them on my feet? If I buy all the exact same socks, then I just reach in the bin, grab 2 socks, and I'm on my way. And I thought that was hilarious. I was like, man, that is somebody who's trying to optimize one like crazy thing to the nth degree. But then you think about it, you're like, that same person, maybe somewhere else in their life, you look at them and you go, that is such an unoptimized process.
Yeah, I mean, that person is definitely, they're looking at the cost benefit of everything. What's the cost of me having matching socks? It's a lot, right? What's the benefit? Not that much. So,
but yeah, you're looking at optimizing these processes. And I'm curious what your perspective on this is, because I'm sure you see this in the assembly line, right? You were talking about how, like, if this station takes 1 minute and this station takes 30 seconds, then obviously this station is sitting idle for 30 seconds waiting for when it could have completed its entire process another time over and doubled its throughput. So you solve that problem, and then it probably exposes a new problem, right? I was talking to Kevin, our VP of marketing, a while back, and we were talking about something similar to this. And I gave him the analogy of you don't realize you have a thorn in your toe when you're getting hit in the head with a hammer. But as soon as you stop getting hit in the head with a hammer, you're like, oh, my toe kind of hurts. And then you realize there's the thorn, right? And I think about it the same way in terms of process efficiency. Like when you've got a really glaringly obvious problem, you're focused on solving that. But as soon as that's solved, then you start to look elsewhere in the process and you may identify something new. Did you guys find a lot of that as you would like, now you take this one station that was the 1 minute down to 30 seconds and it matches with the other. And then all of a sudden you see there's another station down the line that takes 48 seconds.
It was all the time. It was back and forth. We were just trying to keep up with things that were broken. So we never really got to the point where we were just kind of trying to optimize. But yes, like you said, maybe on the right door, we would solve a problem. And then we would notice, okay, on the left door, something similar is happening. And then you dig into these problems and you uncover different things and different optimizations. And ultimately, what we would try to do is if we solved a problem, we would read it across the entire operation. So if we solved a problem in a process that's also done in 10 other places, we would fix it in those 10 other places. And I think that's something that can be done in the financial world as well. If you've got one team that is doing something a certain way, make sure that every other team is doing it in the optimal way as well.
Yeah, I've used this story as an analogy on the podcast before, but I love the joke of the little girl who's watching her mom make the Thanksgiving turkey. And her mom makes this beautiful turkey, and before she puts it in the oven, she cuts the top off of it. And her daughter's like, well, why did you just cut the top off of that beautiful turkey? And her mom's like, I don't know. That's the way grandma always did it. So that's the way I do it. Go ask grandma. So the little girl goes out to the living room and grandma's sitting there and she goes, Grandma, why do you always cut the top off the turkey? And she goes, I don't know. That's how my mom, your great grandma, used to do it. You go ask her. So the little girl wanders over and asks great grandma. She goes, why did you always cut the top off the turkey? And great grandma goes, well, because back then my oven was so small it wouldn't fit. I had to cut the top off or it wouldn't fit. And I think that there's a lot of parallels to what you're talking about with the challenges that we see in something like an automotive manufacturing assembly line and what we see in financial services, right? Is so many times we take a process that was maybe designed around a branch experience and then we just replicate it digitally. We just keep cutting the top off the turkey, right? Versus saying in the automotive example, hey, we used to have to flip the truck upside down before it got to the station because we needed a human to get in there and they physically couldn't do it. But now we have a robot. And so why are we flipping the truck upside down to do it when the robot could easily just go over the top and we would never have to flip the truck? It's things like that that I'm curious what you saw and kind of took away from that experience.
And I think it just comes down to, at the end of the day, there's somebody who's calling the shots for a certain process. And that process, I like to think of that person as the auteur. I'm going to take this in one way with an analogy, but in French filmmaking, the auteur is the one who is the director, and they're the one who's directing everything, producing the film. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with John Gruber, maybe some aren't, but John Gruber, huge tech blogger, and he had a very interesting tech blog, still runs it today. And one of his theories was a product or a process ultimately approaches the level of taste of the auteur. And so if the person who's calling the shots loves to think creatively, loves to optimize things, then everything that they touch is going to approach that same level. And so I think that people who are just like, oh, let's just get the job done, we're going to do it the same way we've always done it, can be a major hindrance. And I think that if you have these fresh set of eyes and these people who are creative challengers. Those are the auteurs that disrupt things.
You know what's fascinating about us humans is we're individuals, right? We all have different ways of thinking and processing and doing things. But one of the things that has really intrigued me as of late, and I've really used this as a lens to like magnify on my own life, is especially hosting this podcast for as long as I have now. I've gotten to talk to so many different people, and we talk about so many different concepts, but we'll talk about this like what we're talking about now, right? Is like, hey, if the person at the top is like, you know what, it's good enough. We built a truck. It's not perfect. We could have built 3 more today, but hey, we built a truck. Good for us. Let's call it a day. Let's go home, right? Versus having somebody in there who's like, no, let's optimize that process because then we can build 2 trucks. And now that we've optimized that one, I can run that across the line. Now we can build 3 trucks. And now I've identified a new problem. Now I can do 4 trucks, right? But what fascinates me is that, like, as you and I talk about that, I would argue that's such a no-duh moment, right? Like, anybody at the top clearly is not just mailing it in, right? But unfortunately, that's not the truth. Like, there are a lot of auteurs that are like, good enough, built a truck, ship it. And I do think that is what separates the pervasiveness of mediocrity in companies versus the companies that become the gold standard in whatever their industry is, right?
Yeah, and I just think it's tough to screen for that specific trait. You really got to know people and know these different personality types in order to bring them on and have a successful and optimized environment. It's a cultural thing for sure.
Oh my gosh, seriously, dude. One of the things that has always driven me nuts, and I've read books on it, I've tried different tactics, I've tried to have AI help me craft very clever questions. But what drives me nuts is that's so hard to pick up in an interview, right? Like, one of the number one things in the vast majority of roles, especially within my team that we hire for, right? Work ethic and attitude are arguably some of the highest, most important elements of the personality trait of that person, right? A lot of things can be taught. It's not like we're doing brain surgery, right? I'm not saying that our people aren't highly trained and skilled and, they specialize in their craft, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, what you're really trying to identify is this person going to get in and be a lazy piece of crud? And so, when you ask somebody in an interview, you're like, do you have good work ethic? They're like, absolutely. And then week 1, you're like, they have no work ethic.
Yeah, I mean, you see it all the time. Like you said, people love to be self-proclaimed. They're the hardest worker in the room. And it's great when that actually happens to be the case. Sometimes it's not the case, though.
What's interesting, too, is that this all goes all the way back to the analogy we were talking about earlier of you don't notice you have the thorn when you're getting hit in the head. And I would say it's kind of also that same concept of, like, whatever pool you're in, you can stand out positively or negatively. And I will say that is one of the things that I think for a very long time in my professional career, that has been one of the things that I always hung my hat on. I was like, I'm going to be the hardest worker in the room, period, end of story. I was like, because I'm probably going to be the dumbest one in the room. So I got to have something going for me. And I was like, I can just outwork people. Like, I can just put in the effort and put in the hours. And what's funny is when I got here and I was like, I'm going to be the hardest worker in this room, man, did I get humbled real fast. And I met some people that just put me to shame. And I was like, that's pretty cool, man. But at the same time, it's funny. I used to be that guy that was the hardest worker in the room. And all of a sudden I'm realizing I got to level up on that. And that's kind of cool too, right?
Yeah. I mean, but you're in the right room.
Yeah,
right? You
exactly.
always want to
That's
always want to be in a room where you're being challenged, whether that's intellectually, from a work ethic perspective. And same thing happened with me when I got to Benzinga. I was like, man, I'm going to outwork everyone. And then we've got guys staying up till 2 a.m. finishing their day. It's like, holy smokes. Like, so yeah, right room to be in, and always feel grateful to be challenged.
I thought it was really funny when you were saying you were in the automotive industry and you were looking around at these people that worked so hard and never quit. And then you came over here and I was like, dude, spoiler alert. Like, that's kind of how this industry operates too.
Yeah. I guess the one thing that I didn't appreciate was just being a brick in the wall, right? I always want to feel like my work is going towards something meaningful and something where I can actually impact the outcome. Because when you're just a brick in the wall, being impactful or seeming important doesn't always happen.
So kind of going back to what you were talking about with looking at each stage or process within that 1 mile train, right? I would have to say that's got to be super, super rewarding when you can identify an inefficiency and you can see the throughput, right? You're like, hey, dude, we built 137 trucks before we did this, and now we're building 139. Like, that's a massive marked improvement that we just created in that process, right? Or we went from, 99.9% defect free to 99.99% defect free. Like, that's got to feel pretty good. But I bet at the same time, like, if you're in an environment where you're like, I could do better, but there's something in my way, that's got to drive you crazy.
Yeah. I mean, especially when, like, just given the scale of a manufacturing plant, we could produce 800 trucks in one shift. So we were pumping them out, but it's not always like you're actually going to make those. Like, those trucks might not come off the end of the line at General Assembly because maybe a different part of the plant has issues. And so if you can't own or take ownership in the entire process from start to finish, it can be very frustrating because your work is kind of just going unseen, right? It's just a pat on the job, hey, good job. That's what you're supposed to do anyways, And so that part can be frustrating, but the sense of fulfillment when we would solve problems, it was satisfying.
I even talked about this on a recent episode too. Shout out to my friend Jim Maroose. He posted a video probably a couple of weeks ago now talking about the new account opening process for community financial institutions. He was pretty abrupt with the message. He was like, look, go do yours as a brand new actual account holder. Time it. Tell me how long it really takes. And one of the things that he was really highlighting is, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. Jim started the fight, but a lot of times we just took an in-branch process and just put it on an iPad and called that digital transformation. And what Jim was really highlighting was that, like your assembly line, just putting it on assembly line and then having robots sit off to the side, not using them because, well, this is how we always built trucks, was with people. You're missing out on an opportunity to create an efficiency or remove a bottleneck. And so he was talking a lot about how, we need to be very thoughtful of exactly what you were just saying, right? Owning the process end to end, not just saying, hey, we took one element of this process and we made it faster or we made it digital. You got to look from the very, very second go to the final output and say, what is the time that it takes to complete that? And then within that, what's needed, what's not, what's redundant, what's truly optimized, and what's just mailing it in.
Yeah. And I've never gone through, a digital transformation in the, I guess, credit union space, but I imagine you've got a new shot at building a process, right? So you've got almost a new lease on life where you can redesign things and optimize it. And it seems like that opportunity is great and should be seized.
That was exactly one of his points too, right? Start from the ground up. Just crumple up the sheet of paper, throw it away, and start from the ground up and say, if I were a brand new financial institution that never exists today, and I'm only going to have a digital account opening process, and I'm going to do everything in my power to be a customer acquisition magnet, what would I make the process look like, right? Because that's how the competition is thinking now.
Yeah. I think one thing that really helps nowadays with building these kind of ground up experiences is you really got to focus on the North Star. A lot of people get lost in the minutia of, oh, well, we want to build this very specific process. We want to build this internally, and we're going to utilize a ton of engineering cycles on this very niche, maybe subcomponent of our mission. And I think that a lot of people need to kind of go back to, and I'm going to use a Jeff Bezos analogy, but focus on what makes your beer taste better. And so for those who are unfamiliar with this analogy, in the 1800s, breweries they not only brewed the beer, but they also facilitated their own electricity creation to brew the beer.
Okay.
And so they had engineers, they had highly skilled technicians, and these people were creating electricity to brew their beer. And then all of a sudden, electricity comes online. You can just plug in to the grid, and now all of a sudden, you don't have to manage all of this electricity creation. You can just plug into a socket. And that is instrumental for the brewery business, because now they can just focus on making their beer taste better. And they don't have to worry about electricity. And so I think that analogy carries over to other industries where if your mission isn't authentication or authorizing a user, nowadays you can just plug into a KYC platform or an auth platform, and that can all be handled for you. Your mission is providing the best user experience and getting them onboarded as fast as possible. So when a lot of teams get caught up in these little side quests, I think it can be kind of detrimental to the overall operation.
Well, and that kind of lends itself to the age-old conversation of build, buy, or partner.
Yeah. Build versus buy. It's always the hardest question to answer.
I'm curious your take on this. I'll be totally transparent. We're absolutely having these conversations ourselves internally, especially in the software world. AI's totally changed the game. And I know everybody's like, oh, bro, could you have made it a whole episode without talking about AI? I'm sorry, not today. But it really has changed things. And I'll give you a great example of this. I've got a genius, literal genius on my team. The guy's brilliant. He built this internal AI tool for us using AI. It started to become super pervasive. And we started realizing it had kind of maxed out. And we were like, do we go buy an enterprise piece of software to do some of this? And we were talking through this, and he goes, look, here's the challenge. He goes, today, can I do what I need to with the tool that I've built? Maybe not. But literally that could change tomorrow. And he's like, I don't mean figuratively. I mean, literally tomorrow could change that. And one of the comments that he made is he said, even if we do buy enterprise software for things anymore, he was like, no way am I ever signing more than like a short-term contract for certain products. Relational products, big relational products, that's a totally different story. But he was like, if I need something to just check mark a box for me, he's like, dude, I'm not signing anything other than like month-to-month contracts. He was looking at a piece of software that he was going to buy to augment. During the process of evaluating, Claude Code rolled out the ability to replace it. He just did it himself, and it literally took him like 5 minutes. And he was like, oh, glad I didn't sign that contract. That was another 30 grand back in our pockets. And so it is totally screwed with our typical way of saying or evaluating, do we build or buy? Because now a lot of times we're like, oh, we can build that. But then sometimes you go to build it and you're like, we should have bought.
Yeah, it can always bite you later on. And I think it's so difficult to evaluate something in the beginning stages and say, oh yeah, it's easy. We just got to do X, Y, and Z, stay focused, and we'll be able to ship that. No problem. And so I think like for small things, yes, obviously no brainer. For bigger projects and maybe even products, I think partnering with someone where that's their sole mission. There's so many startups now, right? Like there's a startup for everything.
Yeah.
If you're working with someone where that's their sole mission and they're receptive to feedback, and you can just say, hey, I need this done. Can you guys do this? And they actually implement that feedback.
Yeah.
That's always the way to go, is just working with someone that they've already built it. They're focused on it. They want to succeed together. Love when those types of relationships are inked up.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to it's for the very relational types of things, right? You want to be committed to somebody long-term that you can really grow with, get to know, understand, and collaborate with. I'm curious your thoughts on too, that the other challenges, I think sometimes, AI tools exceed what we expected, right? And there's so many times where I'm blown away by like, oh my gosh, I actually expected that to fail and it did not. And it was really, really good. But then at the same time, I think it also creates a false sense of security for us sometimes. I won't name any names, but I was talking to somebody recently and they made a comment. They're like, I don't know why I would ever buy digital banking for a credit union or a community bank anymore. I can literally use AI to generate Figmas of what I would want a UI to look like, have it go build code, and I'll just run my own digital banking. And I was like, that's cute. You should see the underneath of the tip of the iceberg. Building a nice, pretty UI and everything, that's actually pretty easy today. And yes, you can totally use, ideation to Figma to code really fast in AI tools. But now you got to go integrate to bill pay and to RDC, and they update an API. And you've got to have all of the infrastructure and security and authentication all behind this. And it's like, man, you start to unpack that sucker and there's a lot underneath the iceberg. I use digital banking as a big kind of obvious example, but even just using ourselves internally, we have a lot of conversations where we're like, oh, we could totally just build that thanks to AI now. And then you get started and you're like, oh, crud. There's actually a lot under the hood. And this thing is becoming a lot more work than we thought it was going to be. Sometimes it's because you get that false sense of security. Sometimes it's because you don't do a good enough discovery of what's underneath. And sometimes, this is another thing I'd love your perspective on. Sometimes it's because then all of a sudden you have to integrate to or connect to or work within a very old product or business case that hasn't evolved. And so now you've got this killer, all robot assembly line that's trucking. And then all of a sudden you hit a spot where you got to have Tim to do it. And Tim's off today. And you're like, well, we're screwed.
Those gotchas always come up, and people that claim they know better, it's like, you want to work with someone who's established, who's focused on customer retention and delighting their users, and their user bases will always speak to the level of quality with the product. And like you said, it's the tip of the iceberg for a lot of this stuff that just appears so simple. And then when you really start to peel back the layers, you get an understanding for all of the work and all of the attention to detail that's gone into things over the years. And that's something that can't be replaced, at least not now. Maybe in 5 years, but not now.
Something that you were telling me when we were talking last that really stuck with me is, I even wrote it down something. You said the tyranny of the marginal user. And I just love the way that you phrase that. And I think that's another trap that really mucks with our operational efficiency, because we get kind of bogged down to the minutia of this epic long tail of functionality really to support a marginal user. So when you said that, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so the tyranny of a marginal user, also another great blog post by this guy, Ivan Vendrov. And basically, the theory of that behind that is a lot of times nowadays we start to develop these products to appease the marginal user, or the user who comes in and has a quick attention span, is only making, maybe one or two actions. And we want to acquire that user, and we want the engagement numbers to be up for that bucket or that cohort of users. And it's ultimately a tyranny, because when that user graduates and needs depth within their product, there's no real on-ramp for them to do so. And so rather than being data-driven and focusing on these marginal users at the top of funnel, I think it's really important to go a little bit further and focus on these thought leaders or power users and build product experiences that cater towards them. Mm-hmm. And with AI now, it's like everything can be hyper-personalized so quickly, and that the platforms that are going to win in the near future are the ones that are modular, and they can be hyper-personalized to a user at whatever level they're at. And so rather than just focusing on a simple UI dashboard for the marginal user, if you can focus on, okay, when this user graduates to the next step, what are they going to need? If you can focus on those things, that really helps advance the product and retain users.
I want to come back to the concept of building features to kind of please everybody. And I want to give you an example of an interesting conversation that I had with one of our credit union customers, and kind of how that plays into the people helping people mission of credit unions, right? But I want to come back to that because one of the things that I think is really interesting, what you were just talking about, is kind of this element of hyper-personalization, right? And what I find really fascinating is that for a long time, I think we as an industry have been chasing this concept of hyper-personalization. And I think what it meant to a lot of people was the ability for, and we'll just use digital banking because that's what I know, right? But for somebody to log into digital banking and be able to upload a picture of their dog as their background, or be able to drag the menu from the left to the right, or something like that. And what's interesting is as we played around with those types of things, as we started to get user data out of it, I'm just gonna be honest, nobody cares. It doesn't move the needle. Like, it might move the needle for a second. But think about why you're logging into a digital banking app. Back to your point of like, focus on what you're there for and what you're good at. Why am I logging into my financial institution? It's to interact with my money. So what happens is I let you upload the picture of your dog. And then even though you have $100,000 sitting in your checking account and $2 million sitting in your savings, I limit your same day ACH to $500. And you're like, dude, you're really going to make me drive into a freaking branch to move the 10 grand I need to move right now? Yeah. That's not personalization. And so, what I find interesting about that is I'll give you a real example of kind of, I think what you were just talking about. I want to get your take on it. One of the things that AI has done for us is allowed us to create really bespoke experiences for people really easily. And, an example that really kind of like shone a light in my own personal life for it. I am not a software developer. I am not a coder. Like, I might be able to fool you in conversation because I've hung around some really smart people and I learned by osmosis. So I can say the words. Dude, I don't know jack about doing it. Like, you give me the computer and...
Nowadays, you might be a vibe coder, which everybody's a vibe coder.
What's interesting is I used Claude to build a custom app for me to help me track some of my health and fitness stuff. And it has snowballed so epically, Tommy. And now I would argue there is only one person in this entire planet that this app provides value to, and it's me.
Yeah.
But where I'm going with that is what was lacking from other apps was not that I couldn't upload a picture of my dog, or that I really wanted the menu on the left instead of the right. It was that I needed it to do and pay attention to and track very specific things in a very specific way that made sense to my dumb brain. Right? And so I was able to build that. And I would say it's less about the fact that AI was able to build that for me. That's a whole nother conversation, right? But it was about what personalization meant to me in that was not that when I logged in, it said, "Hi, Josh," or that it looked really pretty because I was able to control that experience. It was that it had my data represented in the way that I wanted to interact with it. And that was what changed everything. And I think that's a real lesson for how we think about developing features and products and services for financial services.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need to meet users where they're at and meet them where they're at, but also give them a ramp for who they can become and where they can graduate to within your ecosystem. And so I think it's incredibly easy now, especially with MCPs, and you can basically connect into just about anything that you want. Every platform, every company is now extensible, and they can be accessed through an MCP. And I can log into ChatGPT, I can connect the Plaid MCP, and I can now all of a sudden look at all my own finances. Like, that was never a thing. And so like I was saying earlier, I think that the companies that ultimately will win are those that can provide these modular experiences. Users can dig a little bit deeper if they need to. They can access what's available by default. And for your example, maybe there's a specific health metric that you were looking for, and maybe it's not available there by default, but maybe there's another layer that, or another destination that you can access to go and get it. And I think now more than ever, it's been incredibly easy to provide those types of experiences for users.
I'm glad you brought that up. I want to go back to it. So for starters, I don't know if everybody listening knows what you're referencing with an MCP. Can you kind of talk through what is MCP? What does it mean? What does it do?
Yep. So MCP, Model Context Protocol. Basically what an MCP is, you can think of it as an API where data is just being, you're creating data, you're reading data, updating it, deleting it. A lot of MCPs are just kind of API wrappers where they can kind of do those basic things. But an MCP can also be another layer deeper, where maybe an MCP has a specific tool where it runs a workflow for you. For example, for your health app, if you had an MCP, you could say, "Hey, every time I finish a workout, I want you to send an email to my friends and just brag about how I've just finished this workout and share all the stats with them." And so those are kind of two different APIs, right, that would be working together, but they're accomplishing one goal. And so you can kind of really build out those workflows with an MCP that you kind of couldn't have done with APIs, and it would have required a lot of development work. But now you can just chat with an LLM, just say, "Hey, I finished a workout," and it would already know, okay, now I need to let people know. So
yeah, so use that in the context of you were saying, using an MCP for ChatGPT. Like, what does that mean?
Plaid has an MCP, and Plaid built an incredible platform where they basically plug into just about every financial institution, and they've kind of been this open banking layer for the US. And so now everyone's transaction data, all of their financial data, their holdings can be exposed through Plaid in a safe and secure way. And so now I can bring my financial data into an LLM chatbot, which probably is a little bit concerning to some. It's still early days, but now I can create spending charts and I can track my budget and my finances all throughout my LLM, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah. So for those of you who maybe haven't heard, this was relatively recently, but Plaid has publicly exposed an MCP connection to LLMs, including like ChatGPT, where I can go in to ChatGPT or Claude, and I can go into connectors and I can set up a new connection, and I can set up a connection through Plaid's MCP to say my Bank of America account. And now my Claude has access, as Tommy was saying, to all that transaction behavior, right? And data. What I find really interesting about this is a couple of things. So for starters, I've argued that people have been doing this for quite a while. And I think a lot of institutions were blind to it in the early days. Even just anecdotal evidence, talking to different friends and things. People were downloading their statements from their bank, uploading them into ChatGPT, and saying, I want to know where my money's going. Am I going broke? Where am I overspending? Do I have a bunch of recurring fees? Do I have an annual bill that only comes out once a year and I always forget about and it overdrafts me, right? What do I need to be paying attention to? And one of the things that LLMs are phenomenal at is looking at structured data, looking at large sets of data, distilling it. And then I would argue, especially some of the newer versions of Claude are freaking phenomenal at visualization creation. And so, think about a lot of the challenge that we as community financial services providers have faced is we don't want to give people the personal financial management tools of their dreams. The problem is going back to what we were talking about earlier, hyper-personalization. This is actually an area where it really matters to people. Because if I tell Tommy that he's got to use the same budgeting structure as Josh does, dude, we live totally different lives. We live in different parts of the country. We have a lot of variables that come into account, and fitting us into the exact same box is very difficult. Now it doesn't matter. Tommy can just go tell Claude, like, I want to visualize these things about my finances and I want to see it in this way. And Josh can do it totally differently. And we can both do it on the fly and we get that personalization. But, going back in time, that was bad news bears. Like, we do not want people in an unprotected way pulling all their transactions and putting it into open LLMs. These guys have clearly articulated how much they care about your data protection. Hint, hint, it's not much. That's the problem. But now Plaid has exposed this. That's pretty cool if you're a consumer. I'm going to be honest, if you're a community financial institution, that should scare you, right? Because think about how much that disintermediates us as the place where people go to have their relationship with their finances, right? If I just aggregate my investment accounts, my, bank account, my loan portfolio, all of these different things through Plaid, and I just go interact with ChatGPT, I'll tell you one of the areas where this becomes concerning. Well, I guess two. One is you don't know what ChatGPT is responding with and saying, right? Tommy and I were talking earlier, we're car guys, right? And I'm going to go in there and I'm going to very convincingly help ChatGPT lead me to the result that says I can totally afford a Lamborghini. And I can influence that model. I can't afford a Lamborghini and I have no business trying to go buy one. Right? So I have no influence over that or visibility into that. The other thing, and one of the things that I think is becoming more and more important every single day, is being able to influence GEO, or in the more traditional sense, SEO, right? Where somebody goes to Google and says, hey, I'm looking for a great rate on a CD, and they're in Portland, Oregon, and you're a credit union in Portland, Oregon, and you've bought the advertising space on Google to make sure you rank high, right? In LLMs, it's very different. And influencing GEO at a global level is extremely difficult if you're not very large. So the challenge is now I've just brought everything into ChatGPT, and then I ask, how much can I afford? It helps me come to the conclusion I wanted, which is you can afford a Lamborghini. And then I ask, great, who's going to loan me that money? And it makes a recommendation. The odds of it being a small community credit union or community bank is pretty low. And so now we've got somebody potentially in a predatory lending environment and something that they can't afford. They get out over their skis and they get in trouble. And this is going to bring me all the way back around to that thing that we parked. But before I do, I'm going to shut up and get your take on that.
Yeah. In regards to GEO, this is something that I deal with a lot in my line of work, but I think if you're able to provide a service that's truly of value to people, and on your services page or on your product page, if you highlight all of those additional value adds, and reasons why coming to an in-person institution is always going to be chatting with some chatbot that has only a limited context window. That chatbot, there's no way that it could have an understanding of a complete context window. Mm-hmm. And so nowadays, I think that there still is great value in speaking with someone who can understand you, understand everything there is to know about you, and even what's going on in the world. I think it's important to bring context into the mix and allow people to differentiate themselves by a true value add service.
So this brings me all the way back to what I wanted to get your take on when you were talking about the tyranny of the marginal user. And a lot of times we fall into this trap of trying to build everything for everyone, offer every single feature, every single functionality. And we kind of fall into this endless loop when the data would have told us that 0.2% of your membership base uses that. It was not worth chasing, right? But it's well, Chase has it. I have to check mark that box. Well, ABC Credit Union down the street has that. I have to check mark the box. I think there's an additional extra element to that layer that gets a little bit interesting. And this was the conversation I was having with a customer, and I'll keep them anonymous just because I don't really have their permission to share the conversation. So, we were talking about the challenge of the war on attracting new members and attracting deposits. And the unfortunate truth is, I don't really care what the news says. I talk to my friends, I talk to my neighbors, I talk to my family. A lot of American consumers are struggling right now, right? A lot of people's finances are tighter than they've been in a long time. We're definitely in a very expensive time to live in America right now. And a lot of people are struggling. And I don't mean this as disrespect, but a lot of people don't have the funds or the needs or whatever to make them a highly profitable account holder for a financial institution. And so what I find interesting in this whole conversation that I had with the chief revenue officer of our customer is she was talking about, you spend all this time and energy and money trying to go attract a new member. You're not attracting a ton. You're not growing 200%, 300% year over year. Industry average is a couple of percent. And the challenge is you do all this work, you bring this person in, and they're not really a profitable member for you. And so now you spent a couple $100 going industry average to acquire a customer or a member. You spend a couple $100 to acquire them, and then it costs you money to support them. And to your point, without kind of a clear path to making them a profitable account holder, that's actually a losing proposition for you. So here's where I say I think it gets really interesting is the additional layer to that is the new challengers to the market. This goes all the way back to what you're talking about with the assembly line. They came into it with fresh eyes and with a focus on optimization. They came into it saying, I'm going to be a customer acquisition company. I'm not a fintech. I'm not a bank. I'm a customer acquisition company. I'm going to be really freaking good at that. I'm going to dump a significant amount of investment into sales and marketing. But guess who they're trying to acquire? It's not the person that's going to cost them money. They're working very, very hard to steal or get them before you do your most profitable account holders. And they're doing it with data. But this is where I say this gets really interesting, specifically in the context of community financial institutions. And this was the whole conversation this CRO and I had. And she said, but at the end of the day, one of the things she struggles with, those people that aren't the profitable members, those are the ones that need a credit union or community bank more than anybody. They're the ones who really need somebody in their corner that doesn't just see them as a profit tool. They see them as a human. They see them as as a person, a part of their community. They see someone that they want to help, and that's their chartered mission. I mean, the credit union mission is people helping people, for goodness sake, right? And so you have to, that's a part of your mission, and that's what we want to do, and that's what makes us feel good. But it's hard to run a profitable business that way. And so you have to start thinking about, well, what are the other things that I can do in my business to generate revenue so that I can continue that mission, right? But I think that also, to bring this all the way back to what we started this with, Tommy, it brings us into, then all of a sudden we fall into this trap of like, I have to do all the things to support that marginal user though, because that's actually a part of my mission.
Yeah. And I think clearly specifying and having that North Star mission is so important for the people at the top so that it can permeate throughout the entire org. And back to Geo real quick, if you can clearly articulate the types of users that your service can benefit, then I think that AI can always steer back to the credit union experience and service those types of users.
So taking your external background and now being a part of this industry for a couple of years and the learnings you've taken there, if you were to give a piece of advice to community financial institution leaders who are thinking about how do I optimize my processes for operational efficiency, for revenue modeling, so that I can run a super efficient, profitable shop to do all the good that I are in my North Star mission, what advice would you have for them?
I think it just comes down to being an auteur, right? And the auteur, you're behind the wheel and everything is going to be done in accordance with your taste. And so it's on that person to have great taste and great awareness on what people actually want and driving these initiatives to fulfill people would be my advice. Is know what people want, stay focused on the mission, ignore the noise that's not true signal, and be an auteur.
Any advice on how to look at not falling into the trap of feature paralysis? That I've got to have everything everyone else has and gumming up the works?
Yeah, I think I want to tie in an analogy here. The analogy is from Steve Jobs and early Apple days. And he explained this story where there was this notion of standard cost for what it would take to create a computer. And he came in to the accounting org and was like, why do you guys do standard cost? Like, why don't you just know what it costs? And the accountants would say, well, that's just the way we've always done it. You know, we've just always had a standard cost. And so he kept digging and found out that they just had a standard cost, and then they would, at the end of the quarter, they would adjust it. And he found out that they had a standard cost because they didn't know down to the component level what everything was costing. And so they didn't really have great data visibility. They were just relying on the data that they had. And so if you can come in and if you can challenge certain data sets, certain processes, things of that nature, and you can ultimately kind of steer your own ship, and you can land on a metric that should be tied to your North Star. And then once you're rowing in the right direction, then everything kind of just falls into place.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. If you're having to base it off your gut, you should look for a way to base it off of data. And sometimes the answer is you don't have it, right? Or it's not easily accessible and you do have to base it off gut. But that should be a red flag to say, hey, can we go find the data to support this or not?
And it's worth the investment too.
Totally.
You know?
Well, and that's always an evolution, right? I mean, again, I'll overshare. This is something that we've gone through over the years. I've been a part of this company for a decade now. And, every year my VP of marketing and I kind of go through all of our metrics and our budget and all of those different things. And each year we get smarter and smarter with data, right? And it's always funny each year where we get kind of a new subset of data and enough time behind it to really analyze it. And he and I will always laugh. Like sometimes we're like, see, my gut was right. Like I was spot on the money, like down to the, 10th of a percent on that sucker. Like I got it. And then sometimes you get the, yep, would have been nice to have had that data point earlier, like abort mission. But I think if I can give a parting thought on that comment, it's like, don't feel bad if you don't have the data today, right? But go find it, see if you can, because it could totally have a major impact on your business process.
Totally agreed. We've been so focused on just building out our data processes and teams, and just, if we need something, we should have a path forward in order to get that data point.
Yeah. Tommy, this has been absolutely a blast chatting with you. It's super cool, like I said, to be able to see somebody's really unique perspective from a totally different mindset applied to our industry and lens. So this has been a blast.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on, Josh.
Yeah. Well, hey, before I let you go, I got 2 final questions for you. So for starters, now that you're in this industry, where are you going to get information? Like, where are you getting some of your data from? What keeps you up to date?
So I really love 2 podcasts, and I'll shout them out now. Both of these podcasts are a little bit more tech oriented, but I love some of the topics, and they're always following what's happening in the markets. So I really like it. But the first one is Acquired .fm. I don't know if some of your listeners, maybe they've heard of that. They dive deep into kind of company histories, and they really break things down in an interesting way. So that's the first one. And then the second one is TBPN, a business podcast. They recently got acquired by OpenAI. So that one's pretty interesting as well.
Oh, crazy. I'll have to check that one out. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah.
I like it. See, I love when people give me stuff too that I haven't seen yet, but the problem is now my list of stuff to try and follow is like exorbitantly long.
You got homework now.
Yeah, I like it. Well, hey, if people want to connect with you, or if they want to learn more about what you guys are doing over at Benzinga, where and how can they do that?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. It's Tommy Cotter on LinkedIn, or you can go to benzinga.com/APIs.
Right on. Well, Tommy, again, thank you so much for coming and giving us a kind of a new topic of conversation for today. This was a lot of fun, and I hope folks were able to take away something cool to just think about how they're approaching their processes when they get back to work.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Banking Podcast, powered by Typhone. Find more episodes on digitalbankingpodcast.com, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.